Masechet Yevamot, Daf Gimel. We are still in the area of the anonymous part of the introduction to the Masechet. This is a lot of language analysis of the Mishnah. We're going to go through every phrase of the Mishnah and analyze particularly why it chose these words and not other words. And then we are going to get to a couple of really fundamental things: the source for Isur Arayot of a bat, and the source for the very idea that the Sarah of any of the Arayot is prohibited. So even though this is kind of anonymous, and it's assuming we already know a lot of the things later in the Masechet, like a lot of times introductions are written at the end, and I think that's the case here too. But because of that, although it's very linguistic analysis, it will have a lot of really fundamental ideas. Okay, so we're starting off talking about the order of the 15 relationships that fall into this category, that they are exempt from doing yibum, and so too sarotohen v'sarotohen. Why are they mentioned in this order? We tried to say perhaps it's in the order of significant of importance in terms of severity of punishment, was what we tried yesterday, but we saw that doesn't work out. And so rather we said it starts with Sarat Bito, because we learn the Bito from a derasha, and because of that it's more beloved. And so it's kind of the opposite of what we started with first, that we said maybe you should say the most explicit law first, and then we said no, the opposite. The explicit laws everybody knows, it's the ones that we derive, those are most beloved, and we want to highlight those by putting it first. And so the law of Bito is the first, meaning the law of Bito, we could remind ourselves, is this: if Reuven has a daughter, Hannah, and she marries his brother. In other words, Shimon is marrying his niece, which is permitted in halacha, and he's also married to Penina, not related to anybody. So if Shimon dies, Reuven certainly is not going to do yibum with his daughter, and so also cannot do yibum with Penina either. So that's the case that's mentioned first, the daughter's co-wife. Okay, so why this is first? Because it learns from a derasha. Okay, now we ask about that. Actually, everyone on the list is learned from a derasha. We learn from a derasha that they and their co-wives are prohibited. So why particularly this one? So we say no, and we're going to see the derasha later today. No, we're not talking about the law of yibum. Yeah, all the laws of yibum, the laws regarding yibum, all are learned from a derasha. But in this case of bito, the very essence of the prohibition itself, not related to yibum. How do you know that a father is not allowed to be with his daughter? Okay, I know it's taboo, it's disgusting, but we just need a source, right, to say that it's prohibited, because the Torah does not say it explicitly, as we'll see in a second. All the other ones are mentioned explicitly, but the prohibition of a father to be with his daughter is, we learn from a derasha. What is a derasha? We actually saw this in Masechet Chagiga when it was talking about that you can't teach arayot to a large group. It mentioned this very one, and it mentioned it cryptically there, and it mentions it cryptically here too, but we'll parse it out. Damarava Amar li Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi atya hena atya zima zima. So we have a gezerah shava from the words hena and from the words zima. Back in Chagiga, I wondered if it didn't spell it out, because these are secret hidden things that you're not supposed to teach in public, but now it's here too. So I think it's just shorthand. And here's what they're talking about. These are the two pasukim we're going to deal with now. Vayikra, they're both in Vayikra 18. One's pasuk 10, one's pasuk 17. The first one says, Ervat bat bincha, the daughter of your son, or bat bitecha, or the daughter of your daughter. In other words, granddaughter. Lo tegaler vatan ki ervatecha hena. So this pasuk prohibits a man to be with his granddaughter. All right, it only says granddaughter. It doesn't say anything about daughter. Now, I know you're thinking, well, kal vachomer, if you can't be with your granddaughter, all the more so, he can't be with his daughter. But we don't apply kal vachomer when it comes to capital cases. We cannot learn in Isur from a Kavachomed. We need something more explicit than that. Fine. So we know granddaughter. Here's another pasuk that says, Arvat Isha ubita lo tegale. One may not marry a woman and her daughter. Should a woman have a daughter from a previous marriage, once he marries her, he's prohibited from ever being with her daughter. Et bat benav, et bat pita lo tikach. And similarly, your wife's granddaughter from her son or from her daughter, lo tikach legalot ervata sharahenna zimahi. And so here we learn that a wife's daughter and granddaughter are prohibited. So here we go. Now, if we put these two pisukim together, each one by itself doesn't teach us. Because ervat isha ubita, one could have a daughter who is not his wife, but not from his wife. Now, if it is his daughter, if a man and a woman have a daughter together, then isn't it also his wife's daughter? So then that's true. That would be included. If a man has a daughter with his wife, with his own wife, then that would be prohibited because it is his wife's daughter. So what's missing? What's missing in this pasuk here is, what if a man has a daughter out of wedlock? In that case, that daughter is not his wife's daughter. It's because he wasn't married to the mother. And so that's a case where we only know granddaughter, but not daughter. However, if we put these pisukim together and it says the word henna here and the word henna here, then we can fill everything in. And just like a wife, my wife's daughter and granddaughter are prohibited, even if they are not mine, and putting that together with my own granddaughter, who is not from my wife, but rather out of wedlock, but they fill each other in, and therefore this pasuk teaches that the first pasuk includes not only granddaughter, but also daughter, any daughter from my wife or even out of wedlock. That's how we know that all cases of daughter are prohibited. All right, so that's it. Now the word zima also we're going to bring here, because how do you know that there's a punishment for it? Well, the punishments are given in Vayikra 20, where it says, Isha ish asher yikach et isha ve'et ima zimahi. So one may not marry a mother and daughter. If you take the daughter, you cannot marry the mother, and that's called zima. Ba'esh yisrof yisrefu oto ve'eten lo tieh zima betochechem. So now we learn that the punishment is serefa, and it says the word zima here and the word zima here, and therefore we connect all these pisukim together, and we learn that all cases of daughter are prohibited. But you see, it doesn't say it explicitly. We learn it from a derasha, and that's why it's first on the list. All right. Now, how about all the rest of the list? Hashtag amart. Kol mileta da'atya midrasha chaviva le litni la'achot isha lebasof. Since you just said that anything I learned from a derasha is the best, then it should say the wife's sister. The wife's sister, we're going to see, is the most straightforward case. That's the source for the whole law of sarat erva. That anyone, if a brother is married to someone related to the yavam, then he cannot marry the sarah. All that we're going to learn from a wife's sister. So therefore, it should be the last because it's the most explicit. So we say no. No, since it's already talking about their sisters, so it wants to put it together with sisters. In other words, here you have achot ishto right here. And so achot ishto, we see right before it is achotome imo, achot imo. So these are all talking about cases of sisters. So, sister maternal, sister, or mother, sister. So it wants to put one's wife's sister also here in the list. That's why it's not last. Okay, next we're going to ask, fine, so take this whole block that's pink and put the whole block last, so that achot ishto could also be last. Take the whole clause and make it last. Ella. So rather, you know what, that didn't work. We have a new principle. Tana kurve nakat. Okay, so start from scratch. We're going to throw everything out that we just said. And here is the reason why we have this is going to be the final reason for the order of the 15 relatives. First, we bring that is with those who are closest. Tana bito. So who's the closest to this man? His daughter and his granddaughter, right? From his daughter or his granddaughter from his son. Fine, those are his own descendants that are closest to him. So we do that first. Now, v'aidi de tana de shelosha darot lemata dideh, tana nami shelosha darot lemata dida. And now, once you mention his descendants, so let's talk. We're still dealing with descendants. Let's stay there. And we'll talk about the wife's descendants. And so that would be the daughter of his wife, or the wife's granddaughter from her daughter or from her son. Okay, now since we're dealing already with her, so let's stay with her and talk about not only her, but also her ancestors, which will be the next line. So her predecessors are Chamoto, so that's the wife's mother and the wife's grandmother, right? Maternal or paternal. Good. So that makes sense while we were there. And so next comes Ve'tana achoto ve'achot imo dekerobe atzmo. And now we're going to go back to him and his maternal family, and so that includes achoto me'imo, achot imo. His sister, his mother's sister, his aunt, maternal sister, and then his aunt, and then we do his wife's sister. So you notice all these are sisters, even though they're sisters of different people, but they have that in common. So we go from her ancestors back to his maternal family, and from there we go to other sisters on the list. Now from here, really we should have gone to kalato, a man's daughter-in-law, because that is going to be the next closest, and that's certainly closer than the case of a brother who was born after the deceased died, and he was never alive. In other words, a brother who was never alive with the brother who died, they were never alive at the same time. Kalato should be first before that. However, and because that person is not because he's a relative, but rather because he's patur from yibum. If the two brothers were not alive at the same time, he doesn't do yibum. Since he doesn't have to do yibum, so he can't do yibum, and then he's prohibited to the co-wife also. So really, that should be last. Ela. But since we're already dealing with siblings, we want to finish off the list of siblings. And so what you see is that here, Esh ve'eshet achiv me'imo. Eshet achiv, when he has a maternal brother and that wife of the maternal brother. So that's still his talking about siblings. It's his siblings. So therefore, we want to mention the other case of another sibling, Eshet achiv shelo haya be'olamo. And so they see if I put an orange because those are similar, and that's why kalato is last, even though technically his daughter-in-law is actually closer to him than the previous couple of items on the list. And that's it, right? Now we understand the order of all 15 women on the list. Good. Next. Umay iria de tana potrot. Litne osrot. The question is regarding this word here. Right, all these 15, they are potrot, they exempt the co-wife and the co-wife's co-wife from doing Khalitza and Yibum. Why do you say exempt from doing it? Why don't you say prohibited, right? Because in fact, any of these women would be prohibited by the brother, by the Yavam, so-called Yavam, to perform Yibum. That's not only patur, like use a stronger word, say osrot. And the answer is, Itana osrot havamina asur liyabem. If you said, oh, you're not allowed to do Yibum, I would have said, oh, I understand. You can't do Yibum, but perhaps you have to do Khalitza, right? Which is really interesting, right? In this case of, let's say, Sarat Tabat, and the brother dies, so I would be prohibited to do Yibum with my daughter, but perhaps I do have to do Khalitza, because perhaps there is still that zikah, that connection with her, and I have to get myself out of it. And so therefore, I don't just say osrot, but patur, that you don't have to do it at all. Okay, fine. Now, velitni asura lachalos. So then why not say it's prohibited to do Khalitza? Because that was your problem just now. I might think I have to do Khalitza. So say, you're not allowed to do Khalitza. And the answer to that is, my kavid, how can you prohibit someone from doing Khalitza? After all, what are you doing? You're taking off your shoe and spitting in it? You could do that all day long if I feel like doing that right now, right? So I can't say it's prohibited. I'm not doing any prohibited act. It's not significant, but how could you say prohibited? But then we say, actually, you could say it's prohibited. Alama lo. Because if we say, you know what, you can do Khalitza, then I would assume if I could do Khalitza, then I have a choice to do Yibum, because they always go together. And that's why actually it would be appropriate to say Asur lachalotz, right? So to avoid confusion for anyone that thinks that you might be able to do Yibum. And so why not say Asur lachalotz instead of potrot? And the final answer is Kevan de bimkom mitzvah hu de asira sara v'shelo bimkom mitzvah sharia mishum hachi taneh potrot. It's because only in a place of a mitzvah, meaning only in a case of yibum, that's when the co-wife will be prohibited. But if it is not a case of mitzvah, then it would be permitted. For example, if we come here and look at this example, right? Let's say these two people are not brothers. Reuven and Shimon are not brothers; they're not related. Okay, so Shimon is married to someone's daughter, right? So this is father-in-law, and this is his son-in-law, and he's married to the daughter and to another woman. If he should die with children, without children, it doesn't matter, or divorce. So then would Reuven be able to marry his daughter's co-wife? The answer is yes. They are totally not related. They're not brothers, right? And so just because his daughter was once a co-wife with Penina does not make her prohibited. So this is a case of not mitzvah, not a case of yibum. This whole law does not apply. And that's why we want to say potrot. It's patur, so that one would not think if you said osrot, asurot with chalitza, then you might think that it's prohibited to do chalitza, and then all these cases the sarot would be asurot. That's why we say potrot, to teach me that it's not asur if it's not a case of yibum. All right, you see how through this linguistic analysis we learn a lot of other details of the laws. All right, so the next question is on the language of the Mishnah. How can you say that they potrot min chalitza and yibum? Why do you have to say both of these? Just say that you don't have to do yibum. Because once again, like we said before, if you say that in such a case you don't do yibum, well, maybe I have to do chalitza. Right, so there you go. That's a very important rule. And so going back to the example, right, I might think that in this case where Shimon married someone's daughter, Reuven's daughter, and he dies, so he cannot do yibum with Chana, but maybe he has to do chalitza with Chana, or maybe he has to do chalitza with Penina. So that's why it says patur, not only from yibum, but also potrot min chalitza. There's no need to do anything at all. Because this is a general rule. Anytime anyone who can do yibum is eligible for yibum. Yibum is eligible for chalitza, and anyone who is not eligible for yibum is not eligible for chalitza. They always go together. Okay, and now we're asking a question about the order. How come it says here that they potrot from chalitza and yibum? Wouldn't expect yibum to be mentioned first, because that's like the primary choice. Usually, yibum is encouraged, and if you don't want to do yibum, then you're, low life. You're not taking care of your deceased brother. So then, okay, do chalitza. How come you don't put yibum first? Is the question. Okay, or put just chalitza by itself. Abba Shaol hi damar mitzvat chalitza kodemet the mitzvat yibum. Then we're going to see this much later on, but this is a very important opinion. He says better to do chalitza than to do yibum. Okay, what later we'll see the reason why is because sometimes people don't have proper intention. The proper intention for someone performing Yibum should be only to uphold the name of the deceased brother. So let him have an heir who will inherit him and continue his legacy. That should be the pure motive. The problem is sometimes people will have a personal desire for his sister-in-law, and then he'll have that in mind, and he'll be doing this mitzvah for personal benefit. And in that case, it's actually tantamount almost to erva, and he says it's like the children will be almost mamzerim. All right, so that's why he says Khalitza first, because according to Abba Shaul, Khalitza is always the preferred choice before Yibum. Okay, this is very interesting because this is a controversy that goes from the times of Tanakh all the way down till today. Should one do Yibum or Khalitza? And we'll speak more about it over the course of the Masechet. Okay, minyana deresha lemeutemai, minyana desefa lemutemai. Another linguistic question. How come you said there are 15 women? I can count by myself, right? Can anybody count on hands and 1 foot? 15. Why do you have to tell me that there are 15? And then furthermore, you say hare elu potrot. These are the ones. When you say these are the ones, it sounds like you're excluding some case. So since we have two exclusionary clause phrases, we want to know what two cases are being excluded from this list. So remember, everybody on this list does not do Yibum or Khalitza. And so we're looking now for two cases where they would have to do either Yibum or Khalitza. What are those cases? Here you go. More fun cases. It's to exclude these two opinions. We don't know what the opinions are over here. They're going to be mentioned later on Daf Yod Aleph. So we'll mention them here quickly. Rav felt that in the case of a sotah, let's say Shimon is married to a woman who becomes a sotah and another woman, and he dies without children. Now, technically, Shimon was prohibited to the sotah during that time when he was a sotah. So therefore, Reuven also cannot take that sotah, cannot do yibum. According to Rav, he cannot take the sarah, the co-wife of the sotah either. So in other words, according to Rav, this sotah case should be on the list. The fact that it's not on the list and we say only these is because the Tana of our Mishnah wants to exclude the opinion of Rav, and so therefore sotah does not do anything, need not, the Reuven, the Yavam, in the case of sotah, does not do Yibum or Khalitza and is prohibited to the rival wife. Okay, that's the first case we're excluding. And the other one is Dirav Aseh, who's talking about an Ailonit. We mentioned Ailonit yesterday, but yesterday was a case where a person married a woman and didn't realize she was an Ailonit. Ailonit means that she never developed sexually and cannot have children. So then later on, he can say, oh, she's an Ailonit, mekach ta'ut, and the marriage is no good to begin with. Okay, that was the case yesterday when she turns out to be Ailonit. But the case here is when a man marries this woman knowing she's an Ailonit. So we can't say mekach ta'ut, so therefore they are married. He dies without children from the Ailonit or without children from another wife that he has. So now the Yabam, according to Rav Aseh, would be like the other ones on the list, and we would say he does not marry her or the Sarah. So according to Rav Aseh, this would be another case that would be on the list. And so we say no, only these 15, and not the case of Rav Aseh, not Ailonit, that's not on the list. In fact, in these two cases, Sotah and Ailonit, our Tana would say that the Yavam has to do Khalitza. Perhaps he can even do Yibum with the Sarah. That's not clear. We'll discuss that later. And so these are not on the list because he does have some connection to them and would need to make at least a Khalitza with them. Okay, so that's what is coming to exclude these two cases. However, here's the problem. Rav Aseh lemeutemai. Rav and Rav Aseh actually think that these two cases are included in the law of the Mishnah, right? And are potrot from Yibum and Khalitza. So according to Rav and Rav Aseh, why are there the exclusionary phrases 15 on only these? Okay. Well, it's not clear if Rav and Rav Aseh agree with each other. If they do agree with each other, then one of them will be to exclude what the other one thinks. However, but if they each do not maintain the opinion of the other, then reverse. If they agree with each other that both of these would be on the list, then we need two more cases. And so what are the two more cases? Here's one. Someone who doesn't have a father, a minor girl who has a father. The father can marry her off, and it's a full marriage. But if she's an orphan, then the mother or the older brother can marry her off, but it's dependent until she can object while she's a minor and say, listen, I don't like this guy. And then the marriage is nullified when he does that. And this is talking about a case where she is mema'enet, not while her husband is alive. If she's mema'enet while her husband is alive, then like no marriage at all, and the brother could do yibum with the other wife. But if she's mema'enet after her husband dies, well, then that is a case where it's not clear, right? Well, but they were married, and she's only doing this objection after the husband dies. So what do we do in that case? Can the relative, the Yavam, then do yibum with her? So according to them, they would say, no, these are not on the list. You have to do Khalitza in such a case. And that's why it's excluding this case. The other one that will be excluding is me'ut sarat machazir girushato. Okay, a man marries a woman, divorces her, and she goes and is with someone else, marries someone else. She then gets divorced and comes back, and he returns to his divorcee. That is not allowed, right? Once a person's wife remarries someone else, they cannot come back. If they do, and he marries her anyway, the kiddushin is kiddushin. They are considered married. If he dies and now she falls to the brother, so that prohibition technically does not apply to the Yavam because he was never married to her in the first place. And so that would be a case where the brother would need to do Khalitza. Okay, so these are two cases that are excluded from the laws of the Mishnah, where you would have to do Khalitza. And these would apply, and these would be the opinion of Rav and Rav Aseh, that these two are excluded, if in fact they both agree with each other. If not, if they disagree with each other, in that case, if they disagree with each other, then one of them can exclude the other case that their friend said, and the other one would be to exclude any one of these cases that we just mentioned. So now we have plenty of exclusions to choose from that they can use. Fine. Last question in this line of thinking. Rav and Rav Aseh, we just said that they think that the case of Sota and the case of Ailonit have the same law as all the women in the Mishnah, that you don't do Yibum or Khalitza. If so, why not mention them in the Mishnah, right? If they're not excluded, because we said the Tana excludes them because disagrees, but because they don't apply. But if they do apply, then why aren't they listed among the 15? Make it 17. And the answer is Lafi she'ena besarat sara, because these cases, the law of a rival does not apply. So let's just remind ourselves of the case of a rival's rival and see why it doesn't apply here. So sarat sarata is where Shimon dies and he's married to Reuven's daughter. So Reuven is out of the picture. He's prohibited from his daughter, and he's prohibited from Penina forever. However, Levi, who is not related, he is not related to Chana, Levi can take Penina. Oh, fine, he does that. So now he takes Penina, and Levi dies afterwards. Well, because Reuven was once upon a time prohibited to Penina, he remains prohibited not only to Penina, but also to Miriam, and so on forever. So this would apply to a prohibition because they're relatives. However, if it was a case that was because of sotah, and not because of relatives, well, in such a case, then the let's say here, Chana was a sotah, not forget daughter, right? And so the prohibition would apply equally to Reuven and Levi and any other brothers. And so would never possibly get to the case, to the possibility of a sarah of a sarah, because it's prohibited at the outset equally to all brothers. Good. All right. So that takes care of the enumeration. Now, finally, this is what we should have started the discussion of the Mishnah with, which is, what's the source? How do we know that if a brother marries a relative of the Yavam, that you don't do Yibum, and that the rival wives are also prohibited? Tetanura banan. Isha elachota lo tikach lisrod legalot edvata aleha behayeha. Let's parse this pasuk because we're going to analyze it a lot. And it says, a woman and her sister, one may not marry. This is a source for the prohibition for a man to marry two sisters. Litzrod, because they would be co-wives. A co-wife is called sarah because they're always a pain. Legalot edvata, to reveal her nakedness, a euphemism for having marital relations. Aleha, or any relations, aleha behayeha, and to reveal her nakedness upon her in her lifetime. And this is very important, that if a man is not allowed to marry two sisters while they are both alive. So if he marries a sister number one and divorces her, he still cannot marry sister number two as long as the first one is still alive. However, if he married sister number one and then she died, then he's allowed to be married to sister number two. Okay, so that's Ramban uses that to explain why Rachel died before they came on their way, Yaakov's way into Israel. He was married to two sisters before, but that was outside of Israel. But once they come to Israel, then the law kicks in, so he was not able to be married to two wives while they were alive and Rachel died. Okay, now this word aleha is extra, because if you didn't have it, legalot edvata bechayeha. What do you mean aleha, upon her? Aleha mai tamud lomar lefi shene'emar yevamah yavo aleha. Happens to be the word aleha also appears in Devarim, in the law of Yibum, that in the whole case when two brothers live together and one dies, so the brother-in-law will come unto her. Aleha. So now we connect them together. Shamaya ani. Afilu bachat mikol arayot amorot batorah hakatuv medaber. Now, if I only had this pasuk by itself, I would say Yevamah, the brother-in-law, has to perform yibum, and I might think even if it's one of the arayot that are mentioned, even if it's the Yavam's daughter, because his brother, right, married his niece, and so then therefore Yavam would have to be with his daughter, right? I might think that. The reason why it's not entirely crazy is because a sister-in-law is also an erva, right? Just a regular case of a brother's wife is a sister-in-law is also what list of arayot, and so yibum is an exception to the laws of arayot. So maybe I would think that it can be an exception to other relationships of arayot, and the person would have to do yibum even with his daughter or any of the other 15. So that's why it says aleha in both cases, to teach me. So just like over here, we're talking about the case of a mitzvah, the mitzvah to do yibum, and so too here, we're going to apply a place of a mitzvah. That means that isha lachota lo tikach, a man may not marry a woman and her sister, even in the case of mitzvah, because aleha and aleha, which therefore, this is the main source, the main case. So the main case is two brothers are married to two sisters, right? And then the brother dies. And so theoretically, we would say, oh, the Yavam has to marry his wife's sister, who was also his brother's wife. And therefore, no, this pasuk aleha aleha comes to teach you that we apply the prohibition of isha lachota even in the case of a mitzvah. That's why it says aleha, because that's where the yibum comes into this. And chamana lo tikach, and it says do not do it. So therefore, you cannot take two sisters no matter what, not in a regular case and not in a yibum case. All right, so far so good. En li elahi asarata minayin. Fine, I only know that the brother cannot take his wife's sister. But what if the deceased brother has another wife who's not related, a co-wife of his sister-in-law? How do you know that that's also prohibited? Talmud Lomad litzror. Right? Remember that word in this pasuk here? It says lo tikach, to become a rival. Why do you have to say that? I mean, obviously, if you take two women, their wives, they're always going to be rivals. So the word litzror here says lo tikach. Don't take not only the sister, but even the tzara of the sister is prohibited. All right. How do I know? What about the co-wife's co-wife? Should another brother like Levi come and do yibum, and he has another co-wife, and then he dies? How do I know that's also not allowed? Talmud Lomad lisrod velo lasor, because of the extra letter, right? Lisrod, and it could have just said sara lasor. So from an extra letter, we learned this whole chain forever. Okay, the truth is that even without this, you could figure it out, because it's still going to be a co-wife of a prohibition. In other words, once Levi does marry, once Levi does take penina, so Reuven is prohibited to penina. So this is actually just a co-wife. It's a co-wife of the co-wife from the original case, but now that she's allowed, it's simply a co-wife. So you could learn it more simply. And in any case, the extra resh is not the actual derivation of this law, but it is a good hint to it. All right, so far we learned that in the case of two sisters, then one would be prohibited from doing yibum or Khalitza. No need to do yibum or Khalitza in such a case for her or for Sarah. That's only one of the list of the 15. What about everybody else on the list? Veni ela achot isha, sha'ad arayot minayin, amarta, ma achot isha miuchedet, shehi arva, v'chayavim al zidona karet, v'al shigata chatat, v'asura le'yavam, afkol, shehi arva, v'chayavim al zidona karet, it's actually a very straightforward comparison, and the cases are similar. There's no reason to say no. The wife's sister, what's unique about her? Well, it's a forbidden relationship, and if one did it, they would be chayav on purpose. If they do it on purpose, chayav karet. By mistake, they have to bring a korban chatat, and these cases, the yavam would be prohibited. And so too, any case that fits all of these categories, and that's everybody on the list of all the 15 fit this description, that they are forbidden relationships, and if you do it on purpose, it's karet. If you do it by mistake, it's chatat, and the yavam is prohibited to her. So therefore, no yibum, no chalitza, not to them and not to their co-wives. Good. Not to them. What about the co-wives? Okay, now we just do this exercise once again. We're adding the prohibition to co-wives. Amarta. Ma'achot isha miyuchedet. A wife's sister has these unique features, that shehi arva, v'chayavim al zedona karet v'shigata chatat, v'asura le'yabam. That's all the ones we said already. V'sarata asura. Also, my wife's sister's co-wife is also prohibited to me. Afkol, in the case of yibum, afkol shehi erva v'chayvim al zedona karet v'shigata chatat v'asura le'yavam sarata asura. So too, in any case that has these same characteristics, would have the same outcome, and the co-wife would be prohibited, and that applies to everyone, all 15 on the list. And that is the rest of the Mishnah. Then read smoothly and perfectly. And now we've analyzed all the words in the Mishnah, and we just have one last thing to do, which is יכול שאני מרבה אף 6 עריות חמורות מאלו שיהיו שרותיהן אסורות. There are another 6 prohibited relationships that are not in these 15, right? There's really 21 altogether. So what about the other 6? The other 6 is talking about like a man's mother or his aunt he's prohibited to. Now, these cases, Yibum would not apply to, right? Because if a man's because my brother would never be allowed, would be prohibited just the same as I am to all of my paternal relations. Yibum only applies to paternal siblings or full siblings, of course, right? Only paternal siblings. So therefore, any paternal erva would apply to the brothers who would be potential yavam, and so therefore this whole case could not even as a non-starter. Okay, because my brother could never marry in the first place one of these people. Okay, but the question here is, well, what if someone has a co-wife in these cases? So, for example, let's say a man has his father's wife, right? His father's wife is married to some guy, and that guy has another wife, has a co-wife, and he dies. So now there's no yibum because it's my wife, it's my aunt's uncle, it's my aunt's husband. So who's my uncle? The question would be here: am I prohibited from my uncle's other wife, right? So it would be my aunt's co-wife. So there's no blood relation there, and that actually would be permitted. And such a case would be permitted. But that's the question here. Should I, since we in all these 15 cases we prohibited the co-wife, should it be that in the other 6 cases that the co-wife would also be prohibited, right? A person's aunt's co-wife, right? His aunt's husband's second wife, who's not related. So an answer, so can it be that it would be prohibited? Amarta, ma'achot ishto miyuchedet, shehi erva, v'chavin al zedona karet, v'ashi gata chatat. All these were the same. That was so above. But the case of the sisters, the wife's sister, which was the source for everything, and she is prohibited. And if someone sins on purpose, is karet. If by mistake, it's chatat. And the brothers can marry her, right? If I marry one woman, then my brother can marry my wife's sister. There's no problem with that. And yet, if he should die asura leyavam, then the brother who's married to the sister is prohibited, and therefore the co-wife is prohibited. Af kol shehi erva. So therefore, we only prohibit the co-wife in that circumstance if all these are true. Shekol shehi erva. That's all true for a paternal aunt, but the next one is not. Has to be someone who my brother also could marry. But just like I can't marry my aunt, my brother also cannot marry our aunt. And so therefore, the law of the co-wife is prohibited, does not apply here because it does not have all the qualifications of the wife's sister. Yatsu shesh areot chamurot me'elu, ho'il de'i efshar linaseh lachim, sarotehen mutarot, she'en sara ela me'ach. And so we exclude all of the other 6 paternal relatives that are also chayav karet because the brother cannot marry them, and therefore their co-wives are permitted because we only prohibit a co-wife if it's married to someone's brother. And last line, azhara shamanu onish minayin. All that we've been talking about is we know that it's prohibited. How do you know? We heard that that's a warning. In order to punish someone, you need 2 pasukim. You need a pasuk to say it's prohibited, and another pasuk to tell you that there's a punishment. So in all the cases that we just mentioned, we know that azhara, the warning. How do we know the actual punishment applies? Even to a sarah, right? If Reuven would marry his daughter's co-wife or try to perform yibum with his daughter's co-wife, how do you know that not only is it not allowed, but it would also be karet? Amar kera ki kol ish asher yaseh mikol hato'ebot V'nichreta hanefesh ahi. That this is the conclusion to the chapter in Vayikra, and it says all those on the list that we mentioned are all chayivim karet, and because on the list was also this litzrod case, so therefore that also is included in the prohibition of karet. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.